If you look around at the world today, it's easy to feel like it's on fire. A war breaks out on the other side of the world, and all of a sudden oil prices have spiked and refugees need housing, and we wonder what we should be doing, or actually if we can do anything at all. Or we read about our community being under attack, and we think carefully about what we would do if one of our neighbors needed us to stand up for them. The opportunity just never seems to present itself. We also know that how we act in times of need often becomes a defining part of our identity. A person who rushes into a burning building to save someone's life will always be the person who rushed into a burning building. A person who, when presented with a moment of need, rose to meet that moment. And we want to believe that we are also the type of people who would do the same, who would rise to meet a moment, who would rush into a burning building. But the crises we face today are not like burning buildings. They are not confined to one place or one time. They don't manifest as clear moments where time stops and instinct takes over and we either act or we don't. Instead, they are long and drawn. They feel distant. And rather than being able to act on instinct, our brains take over, and we're left to wrestle with whether and how and when we should act. And of course, what often ends up happening is we do nothing at all. Not because we don't care, but because we feel paralyzed. If you feel this way, you are not alone. This is the reality of living in a world on fire. But what I hope to do today is to be able to share with you some of the things I've learned over the past few years about what individual, ordinary people like us can do to step up in a world on fire. I'm a researcher. I study innovation and entrepreneurship, typically in high-tech settings, places that are very dynamic and uncertain and difficult. I study mostly high-tech, but I also study crises and disasters, like COVID. When the pandemic first hit, I didn't actually set out to study it. Instead, I did what many of us did, which was rush to the store and buy all of the soap and canned vegetables that I could get my hands on. And then I went home and I started sewing masks, beginning with the fabric of our living room curtains. Later, my wife and I began making air filters for exactly the same reason. There were horrible shortages and people couldn't get them. My career as a mask maker, though, was relatively short, partly because I'm quite bad at making masks, but mainly because my very first step was to go online to learn about materials and designs. And in doing so, I inadvertently stumbled on what I now think are some of the most important and undertold stories of the pandemic. I learned, for example, about a young man in Bangladesh who set up a website to help his immunocompromised grandmother in New York get help with her groceries because she couldn't leave. I learned about a restaurant owner across the river in Cambridge who teamed up with a local college student to raise money to make and deliver meals to frontline medical workers. Eventually, that effort would grow and deliver more than 800,000 meals across the country. I learned about 4 engineering coworkers who read about the shortage of ventilators and posted a note to LinkedIn wondering if maybe their skills could be put to use. That led to a volunteer collaboration of 200 individuals across 11 countries that's still going today. I learned about this entire world of grassroots efforts convened on Zoom and managed from living rooms, brave individuals who had found a way to break that paralysis, who stood up to try to fix all of the things that were broken in those early days. And collectively, these efforts were incredibly impactful. They would go on to deliver hundreds of millions of masks and face shields and isolation gowns. They would innovate medical devices like ventilators and pulse oximeters and oxygen concentrators. They would provide material, emotional, financial, educational support for countless individuals all across the globe. And so it very quickly became clear that my role was not going to be in making bad masks, but rather in trying to understand and document this massive mobilization of human effort. And for the past 5 years, that's what I've been doing. Working with a team here at Boston University and at other universities, we've been trying to document and to understand what allowed these people to step up and who they were and what we can learn from their experience for next time. And our work is still ongoing, but there are some things that I can share. And I want to because I think that they are important as we look at a world today that feels every day like it's on fire. When I describe this work, one of the first things that people wonder about, maybe something that you're wondering about right now, is, well, who were these people? Who actually made them qualified to step up and do what they did? And people often expect me to describe them using words, thinking that they were maybe smarter or more qualified or better connected than we as mere mortals are. And there's a reason we want to think that, but in fact, it's not true. They were profoundly, deeply regular people. We met teachers, costume designers, artists, program managers, consultants. We met college students. We met high school students. We met husband and wife teams. And I think that this is a really important and wonderful lesson. The only qualification for stepping up in a time of need is a willingness to step up. We get this wrong, though. We think that we need some sort of permission or certification. We need qualification to act. And in reality, crises, experts are overloaded. The leadership may often be absent. And the needs spill over into areas that no one's job description was ever designed to cover. People need to do new things. At the same time, crises generate a whole multitude of different needs. Even something simple and straightforward. COVID was a respiratory disease. People needed masks, but at the same time, frontline workers needed meals. Kids needed schooling. Misinformation needed correcting. Vulnerable, immunocompromised grandmothers needed help with their groceries. And when there are many things to be done, everyone is qualified to do something. And the last reason that we get it wrong is because we underestimate ourselves. We look out at the world and we see great big problems and we think we need great big solutions and we think that great things are created by great people rather than by ordinary people acting under extraordinary circumstances. So the answer to the first question, who were these folks? It was us. And now the next question that people usually ask, and the next question you may be wondering is, well, how did they actually start? And for many of us, this is the first and most difficult question because we know that we can work and we know that we can grind. We don't know how to start. For many of us, this is the first and most important question, and it's actually one that has been at the heart of our research. And it's a difficult thing to understand because every case that we've studied is different in some way. But the common theme among them is that no one jumped into big, meaningful, impactful work right away. And this makes sense because crises are confusing. Information changes quickly. Sources may conflict. There are many different needs, but it's not clear where to focus our attention. And what we get wrong in this situation is that we want some clarity. We want some assurance that what we're doing is the right thing to do or the best thing to do. But that clarity doesn't exist in crises. Instead, the only way to move forward is to start small and learn as you go. For many people, starting small might simply mean working with what you have in front of you at hand to try to solve a need that has emerged in your own life or in your community. For me, this was sewing masks. Sewing masks wasn't where I ended, but it didn't need to be because it got me moving. In other cases, starting small might simply mean reaching out to your neighbors or friends to talk. And this sounds counterintuitive. It sounds almost a little bit silly to say that you could have a meaningful impact on a crisis by starting a conversation. But in fact, many of the biggest and most impactful organizations in our data began exactly in this way, with people reaching out to say, gosh, this seems bad. What should we do? And while they did it to sense-make and they did it to learn, what ended up happening was that they found other people who had their own ideas, who had their own resources, and together they realized that they had answers, not just questions. The third thing, and maybe a nice lead on from that, is that if you want to have an impact, don't go it alone. Crises and disasters can be alienating. We experience these traumas alone in our homes through the screens of our phones, and this was especially true, of course, for COVID with social distancing, but it's true today as we doom scroll into the night. And humans were never meant to face our fears alone. We draw strength from one another. And I think one of the most meaningful insights that I draw from this work is that we actually don't have to face these traumas alone. When we began this work, I expected to hear stories of brave individuals standing up against the odds to right wrongs in the world. What we actually found were communities coming together, mobilizing to try to solve the needs that they saw their peers and their members facing. A wonderful example of this is a group called Something Labs. Something Labs was based out in San Francisco, and the effort began when one person emailed 4 of their coworkers asking for help making face shields. And nobody had a plan at the beginning, but they knew that something would be better than nothing, and so they got to work. And as they got to work, interest grew and word got out. And it started with coworkers, but soon it was friends and roommates and even strangers. And as interest poured in, they started setting up systems in order to try to capitalize on all of that interest and all of that talent and energy. They established team leaders. They set up processes that people could suggest different ideas and needs. They created ways that volunteers could self-select into roles. Over the course of the following summer, over 400 people would filter through this effort. At their peak, they had 150 volunteers, 75 paid employees, folks that might not otherwise have had a job during that time, who were working in an abandoned dance studio, in a co-working space, and in a shuttered museum. And collectively, they would go on to make more than 700,000 face shields, isolation gowns, intubation boxes, ventilator and respirator parts that were shipped all over the country. And you hear a story like that and you think, it sounds a little absurd. It sounds like surely it's an outlier. But in fact, we had many stories exactly like this in our research. Created for Crisis reached 2,000 people. It began from a conversation on Reddit. Helpful Engineering, 18,000 people. Open source medical supplies reached 62,000 contributors all across the globe, and it began from a conversation and a call for help on Facebook. And what I take away from this is that every one of those 62,000 people made a choice not to face the trauma alone, but to try to face it together. And when we think about what we might do in a world on fire, what we might learn from this, it's that maybe the question isn't about how we can step up, but rather what we can do to help others step in and share the load and amplify our effort. I'll end with this one final thing. When we do our interviews, we often end the interviews by asking people what they learned and what they would want others to know. And often, very often, the answer is a variation on this theme. Something is better than nothing. You don't need to be an expert. You don't need a plan. You just need to start, and you don't need to start alone. The world is always going to be on fire in some way, but the same ordinary impulse that makes us buy too much soap or sew bad masks is the same impulse that, when filtered through community, is exactly how ordinary people can step up in a world on fire. Thank you.